can see the board of this course, and I'm very pleased to welcome here to introduce mainly Teresa Stoppani to lecture with us, and I'm very honored really to welcome her to Turin for the Department of Architecture as well of the Politecnico. Well, somebody who understood the second meeting spoke in English, as even though Teresa is mother tongue Italian, she preferred to speak in English, to present her lecture in English, as she works from a long time abroad, mainly in England. Well, Teresa Stoppani is an architect and a theorist who focuses on architecture theory and design practice as two sides of one singular domain, that is architecture, actually. And along with her activity of theorist, Teresa sits on the editorial board of the European Architectural History Network and is co-editor of the Journal of Architecture. And Teresa began her academic career teaching at the Venice University of Architecture, UAV. And afterwards, she worked for the Architectural Association, the University of Greenwich, the RMIT University of Melbourne, among many others. And especially at Leeds Baggage University, Teresa was head of the architecture department in the School of Architecture Design, Art, Architecture and Design, and was also appointed as director of the PhD program in architecture starting from 2013. Well, once we asked Teresa to join us for this seminar and to lecture on the subject of map, she quickly replied that her lecture title could have been Critical Cartographies. And as geographers probably know, critical cartography stands for a specific branch of critical theory engaged in mapping power relations that occur in the territory. However, I'm mostly suspicious that Teresa has something else in mind. And she will probably say, well, okay, critical theory, all right, but that is not enough. So indeed, cartography, I agree, definitely agree that cartography is more than the only critique of ideology. And I'm sure Teresa will show us today why. And actually, in order to avoid whatever affiliation to a specific critical tendency, Teresa used kind of a subtle trick in her title. Indeed, if you pay attention at the title, you see cartography is written in plural. It is cartographies. And I'm pretty sure that this plural stands for the surplus of meaning that Teresa wants to show us today. So indeed, it emphasizes Teresa's wider, I would say, Teresa's wider theoretical aim. Namely, in my opinion, that is to show the possibility to produce theoretical discourses on architecture without avoiding the multiplicity of forms, discourses, and actions that it relates to. And basically without reducing it to a single domain or basically something like this. So following this remark on multiplicity, it should be mentioned that Teresa recently co-edited a book entitled This Thing Called Theory that shows how the theory of architecture today is still mostly an unknown territory, and a territory that is worth to be mapped. And this book gathers contributions of a conference that was held in Leeds in 2015, and also provides a title for a chain of other events that following meetings that took place at the Architectural Association in London, of which the last one was held in May. And for those willing to understand what this last meeting was about, I recommend to read the seminar review published on the upcoming issue of Artet magazine, issue 3. And furthermore, I can perhaps even announce that soon this simple theory will take the form of an international group involving some of the scholars who participated in the events that took place so far. And finally, on the occasion of the recent meeting at the Architectural Association, Teresa has anticipated, I believe, some of the contents of another book that is forthcoming. And this book does not have a title already, but will hopefully, present her theory of double crossing, which I find particularly intriguing personally, which she defines as the ability to instigate disturbances that may lead to death and birth of particular form of practice. Well, personally, I'm very impatient to read the book in order to understand, even if double-crossing stands for something that I have in mind already, but not only me, but maybe Marcosin's as well, that is that theory produces breakings, disjunctions, basically theory lies, and though we are conscious that of this condition, somehow this is the conditions for its own reproducibility of theory, basically. So finally, in order to go back to our lecture of today, I cannot avoid to mention Teresa's book Paradigm Island, Manhattan and Venice, published on Prof in 2010. And in this book, Teresa defends the thesis that the apparently opposite realities of Venice and Manhattan manifest deeply affinities in the way they have been built over time. And so their respective dynamics, or modus operandi, as she says, can be understood as two sides of the same paradigm. So, in conclusion, for the multiplicity of the topics explored by Teresa in the field of architecture, theory, and philosophy, without that her contribution could be really consistent, I would say, with the attempt of this seminar to see how a single lemma, that of SCHEMA, scheme, in face of different disciplines, can turn itself into a multiplicity. So for this reason, among the many, please join me welcoming Teresa Stoppani.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation, first of all. And thank you to Andrea, who gave my lectures, which I don't like that much. But I think most of all, thanks to Franco Farinelli, who provided an amazing introduction. So consider me a sort of a storyteller after you have the conceptual introduction. And actually, it is a series of stories I'm going to tell you. What I'm trying to do is to make a map. And of course, as all maps, it will be partial, without a beginning and without an end, and faulty. But first of all, I want to link this to the idea of the course, the whole series of seminars, SCHEMA. And I'm just quoting your words. You are proposing to trigger, and I quote, coincidences, misunderstandings, overlaps, that, and still your words, will be constitutive facts of the map that will trace the semantic regions of the word SCHEMA in a hypertextual form. Interesting. So what I really want to try and address is the idea of a map, and what is your project going to be, which is a map rather than a dictionary. So without reading to you your words again, I use the definition of SCHEMA you provided, but I want to extract some terms, which I think in a way, maybe indirectly, I will address in my map. Complexity, or I would say the relational obscurity. Not, or as not transparency, or as not revealing. Model, this would be another series of seminars, maybe in 2 years' time after another SCHEMA good way. But model, or the attempt to grasp and literally grab, and the impossibility to copy and imitate. Simplification of reality, but not only of reality, or, more importantly, reduction and conventions, and very importantly, authors of these conventions. And then understanding as a form of knowledge and surroundings, or redefine the boundaries in and outside me. And I say me meaning, yes, the discipline, but I also mean personally, me embodied and each of us. So I suspect that with talking about the map, and yes, a bit tongue-in-cheek with the idea of critical cartography, which you're right, this is absolutely not, it's something else. I'm almost trying to suggest the impossibility of the schema as the possibility of the schema, which I don't consider as a contradiction, and I hope it will come clear at the end. This is Catherine Imran in Dividing the Land, and you can read it, but really, besides the idea of the conventions, I'm interested in the sentence she borrows from Record Watson, the geography of the lands, and the last one is the geography of the land. So with the idea of critical cartographies, I really want to propose to reconsider the map in relation to architecture in this context, but not only as a system of representation, but as an intellectual and political project of space. So from the portraits of cities in the impossible early bird's eye views to measured space of the map as iconography. The convention and what we've come to call the lies of cartographic representation reveal that the map, in fact, is a project. And the production of a never-controlled critical space. The map is always partial. It's never coextensive with that which it maps. It establishes a relation of difference and excess with the territory it represents, or rather represents. And in that sense, I argue that the map is a project. It's a generative system capable of producing and incorporating those interpretations, intentions, transformations that characterize the many possible unfoldings of the projects, in plural, and its process. So what is a map in this sense? And I borrow part of the definition of the Teresa. Teresa and Catherine, which by now you've read. So the terms I'm again interested in, and you're probably very familiar with these definitions, the idea of the experimentation, the contact with the real, the openness and commutability of the map, but more importantly, the fact of its detachability, reversibility, possibility of modification, and the fact that these can be performed by different individuals or groups, and more importantly, that can be accessed in different ways. So, what is a map, and what is the difference between making, reading, and using a map? We can manipulate them, we play with them, we question their truthfulness and their nature, the reliability of their informative content. But maybe we need to take them with what Louis Bourgeois calls irony. The map, so, is polysemic, it's operatively multiple, it's never only a representation of reality, it produces a reality every time that it comes to be defined or redefined, entered, and used. It's never complete, it remains open, it continues to approximate a referent which is simultaneously both internal and external to it, and which it therefore continuously reproduces. So it's much more than a recording and a limitation of reality. It connects us to reality through fragments of space and time that each need to be experienced, recognized, reconstructed. So Mapping is a representation that is at once partial and excessive to the object, and it contains many and contradictory often and possible projects. It offers the possibility for an understanding of space, but at the same time, it provides the grounds for the production of other from it. The map condenses in the sense that it brings together different events, transformations, and their narratives. And it is in this unresolved combination of insufficiency and redundancy and the presence of otherness that the project finds its life and performs itself. Mapping, and this is the complication, includes also its maker, both as object and subject. It's reflexive and self-representative. It contains subjectivities, and it refuses absolutes. It is always already, in a way, compromised and implicated with its subject maker, and therefore with change. Not a fixed documentation or a container of information. It does not reproduce the real, but extracts from it. In this sense, it's a combination of its completeness and sufficiency of its description. It becomes, it remains a condenser of possibilities. And in doing this, it enables change. So what I'm trying to do with this quite familiar, I think, introductions to suggest that I want to dismiss the idea of the map as a tool for the project, as we use it for architects, for information and representation, and look instead at the idea of the map and the making of the map in terms of contents, construction, representation, as a cultural project of space, of which the architectural project is necessarily part. Now, if the map goes beyond and is more than a schema, as I'm trying to suggest, because it reduces but also exceeds, and does that in order to be able to act in the sense of producing a project, then perhaps the map can be used to go for a redefinition of schema, and this is perhaps, I begin to suspect, the part of the task of your series of seminars. But let's go into architecture for a moment and its representation. And this is from Beatrice Colomina, I don't know, text, I think from the 80s, which is apparently talking about the labyrinth as the origin of architecture, but it's really not. She's talking about the representation of, or rather interpretation of the building and the discourse developed on it as the origin of architecture. Thread of Ariadne is not merely a representation of the labyrinth, it is a project, a veritable production, a device that has the result of throwing a reality into crisis. Throwing a reality into crisis is the key role of the project. So I want to stay on this text for a moment and literally take it apart, or rather use it to inhabit this space. Colomina rereads the myth thesis in Ariadne because she wants to emphasize the difference between building as an act of construction and architecture as a critical act of interpretation. Architecture is not only production, it's not only representation, but reproduction. We need to keep the two parts of the term separated. So, in reading the structure of this given space and understanding and communicating the workings of the structure, Ariadne's thread is not a mere representation of the labyrinth, but she, Colomina says, a project, a veritable introduction, a device that throws reacting to crisis. So the ball of thread offers to Theseus a possibility. It's not already an unfolding linear narrative, but it is only the potential for the yet undisclosed. I'm just borrowing Cornelia Parker, the story of these projects is another story. But what I want to suggest here is that architecture is neither the thread nor the labyrinth as the given, but resides in the possible interactions of the two. Interactions. And they remain endless, multiple, and formless, or rather multi-form. Let's call it mapping for a moment. So it is not, and therefore it is not the form of the labyrinth building, which is our concern, or the form of the thread, the line, or the drawing, or the possibility of it, but rather the repetition of the unrolling of the ball of thread, and what happens between, or among, because there's many, the possible enactments of this interpretation, this experience of building. So Ariadne's thread is not only a representation, critical and interpretive, of a given of which produces knowledge. The thread, that is, does not produce the project of the given labyrinth, nor does it produce the drawing that represents it, but it reads space selectively and produces a partial knowledge of the given, but also an access to the given. And this is where, in the space between this partial knowledge, in the space of the difference, in this distance from a non-coincidence of the two components that the project is produced. The project is another project, and therefore the possibility of many projects. And it is this distance that opens possibilities for the project as changing and endless. We're running out of batteries, I think. It also allows for a reading of architecture as a project that moves away from the reference to an antecedent, to a predefined model, or even to an abstract type, to become a dynamic mapping of shifting condition. And this is, as we all know, extremely important with the discipline, which is obsessed with finding its origin, knowing perfectly well that it doesn't exist and it can't find it, and therefore itself is constantly reconstructed. And in this is the strength of this act of repeating the act that in itself produces spaces. So map and project and architecture, therefore, are redefined themselves, but also in their relation to both the viewer user, whether we're talking about map or representation or a building, and author. And author is extremely important because the idea of authorship in architecture, of course, touches on these ideas which you are proposing, including SCHEMA and the algorithm and what's happening today in architecture. So the interesting element here is that unlike three-dimensional pictorial or digital images, cartographic representation requires a form of and an act of direct placing and direct correspondence with its reading and comprehension. And unlike perspectival images, the observer or the map is not placed in a specific point defining distance from the image, and this is absolutely crucial. He, she must place himself, herself inside and within the image. That we could argue is already not just appropriation, but authorship and partial transformation of the image. But the map is more than an image. It invites, informs, enables movement, potentially free or different. And once we have entered it, manage it, and then we're free to wander and to navigate in it, but also to get lost. The map, just to sum up, is much more than a recording and an imitation of reality. It connects us to reality through fragments of space and time, which we need each time to engage with, to identify and experience. So if the materiality of the thread is linear, its operation is far from it. It develops, it literally unfolds possibilities. And here I'm arguing that the labyrinth produces a mapping, or rather the thread in the labyrinth produces a mapping, which is a different form of representation possible in architecture. And in this sense, I call it the locus of the project, the possibility to both describe and generate, to produce and accommodate different possibilities before a decision which is then allowed for or invited from the viewer, who becomes much more than the viewer and completes the image. In this sense, it places the idea of map in direct relation to the decision process of the project of architecture. So, how to dismiss the use of the map as a tool in architecture and look instead at this map as a project of space? And is it possible to reconsider and explore the contents, the construction, the representation of the map as such as a project? So if we reconsider the relationship between Daedalus' labyrinth and the mapping of it produced by Ariadne's thread, the non-coincidence of the two and in the way they operate, we already see that we are performing a project. Formed, closed, defined, the former, formless, or multiform, open and redefinable, the latter. And the two are one of the key dilemma or two different phases of architecture. I'm just realizing in reading this that I have completely ignored Theseus in the story, who is the one who in the end that needs to do another thing in this relation, which is choose and risk. And that actually would be a very important element in the process of the project. But that's another story. I'm now going to move through a series of elements which I think try to take into consideration and maybe dismiss components or constituent elements of what a map is. And I start with tracing because in the same definition I showed you earlier, Deleuze and Guattari also suggest that while the map has, as we discussed, multiple entryways and is performative, the tracing suggests an idea of competence and a repetition of the same. In order to embrace this idea, I want to show you tracings and argue that they're not tracings, essentially. This is work by Kathy Prendergast in the 90s. She actually continues, if you look at her more recent work, this is an ongoing work which takes many different titles and forms. But this is from the 90s, and it's a series of what she calls city drawings. Now they're interesting because they're small format pencil drawings, like a little bit bigger than this. Which she produces by tracing over maps of world's capital cities. They're not to scale, they're sized to fit the paper they are drawing on.
They have no dimension, they have no territory. They are artificially delimited by the interruption of the pencil lines on the paper. They float in the whiteness of the sheet. They're removed from any possible context, natural, geographical. They show system of interconnections and networks which are filigreed by the graphite. So the cities are reduced to systems of road arteries. They do not offer elements of recognition or identify in their connective tissues. Buildings or parks or landmarks and topography have been removed, and there's no legend or cartographic symbol. But of course, and I've chosen this intentionally because I can recognize this because I live there. So maybe there are some questions here. So from this configuration, reduced to systems of neural connection do emerge the history and the political dimension of the city, as testified by the structure of the networks and the voids that Prendergast translates into graphic omissions. So form is only indirectly suggested, and we are given the connection, the times, the movements that are intrinsic to the space of the city, and yet we do not know where we are. We're deprived of scale, of topography, monuments, landmarks, territories, coordinates. We cannot place ourselves. We are not able to construct our relation with the place which is represented, and to situate the place itself within a wider system of external relations. Reduced to tracings, these drawings of cities lack a point of access and the multiple entryways that characterize the map. But do they, really? Next example, same artist. This time we really have maps. Prendergast, the title is Lost, of this series. She moves on from these maps of getting lost, and she takes them to the territorial and continental scale. She takes, in this case, a map of the United States, and digitally she alters it. Unfortunately, you can't read it, but every name of places, cities, any other geographical elements are renamed. We see state borders, rivers, roads, railway lines, but everything which has a name is called lost. Lost river, lost valley, lost creek, lost city. And we are able to recognize this territory only when it encounters the continental edge for the discontinuity and irregular features. We're lost. We can't get any information from this map. We actually provide information to this map. We don't know it, we recognize it only because we can project onto it our familiarity. But what happens if we go one step farther? Empty Atlas, part of the same series of projects. In this case, the Atlas remains the Atlas, but the operation of selective removal continues. We still have the book of the Atlas in book form, and here everything instead is covered up. No names, no replacement of names. What helps us are the imperfections. The fact that these erasures, or rather obliterations, are not perfect. We can still detect something, or again, we recognize a river or an intersection or an irregularity. We are yet, even if we manage to recognize some fragment, no longer able to recognize the whole. We are, what she says, lost. This is, I think, a beautiful image, because if one looks at it in distraction, ignores it. So we have familiar but unnamed contours, familiar shapes, obliterated name, And they render explicit in being presented in this way key elements of cartographic coding and the process of recognition that it triggers. Without landmarks, without relevant and noticeable elements, without names, these maps show us how it is possible to move from A to B, but they never reveal where A and B are, and not even what they are. Connection networks, cities or territories, traced and infiltrated by lines, these maps have lost orientation. Not only the orientation of the viewer, the impossibility of becoming a user, but also of the places themselves. Excessive reduction, maybe. It strips the maps of elements to the point where the map looks like a map, but it no longer is the map. The map is reduced to a representation. And this is really where I'm heading. If we move this to, and I'm again borrowing from artists who I think are doing an amazing work in this field. This is Simran Gill, it's 2009. The title of this work is 4 Atlases of the World and 1 of Stars. And they actually are. The problem is that 5 paper atlases are reduced in papier-mâché spheres and are placed, and this is also an important moment, on the gallery floor. So what are these things? Obliterated, shredded, macerated, what used to be accurate, organized cartographic representations on the pages of the atlas are returned, and this is the irony maybe Bourgeois hinted at, to a formal resemblance with the object that they attempt to grasp, terrestrial globe, our mental construction of a celestial sphere. They still evoke the mass of the planet or the projection of the skies, but scale, measurements, information, and even figurative descriptions here are lost. So even in this form of extreme translation, where both the quantitative and the qualitative information are erased, the evocation of form continues to sustain the ambiguity of the map, its lie, the lie of its construction, because embedded in these balls is still there. The fact is that we cannot see it anymore. Now, what this work does, and I've been there, you really want to kick these things, because there's this, what's the name, the great dictator, the Chaplin, you want to, there's this hidden, I don't know, I don't think it's just me, but anyway. So what the work does is to undo a series of conventions of cartography, of course, but then it invites us to explore their nature and really to question what the map is beyond the representational. The structure that enables a form of organized communication or conveyance of information, you can name it, is dissolved. And marks, words, and lines, which are still there, are rematerialized and turned into something else. And we have these wishing objects that trigger a different set of references of communication. Less valuable, you decide. We can manipulate them, we can play, we can question their truthfulness and their nature, their reliability of their information and informative content. But what emerges here is something else, an emotional connotation of these objects, which becomes at the same time a critical commentary of the relational claims of representation. These isolated new globes float or roll on the floor, attracted in what is a makeshift gravitational system of mutual attraction. They're no longer maps, maybe. They're reinvented globes. But maybe, yes, they do tell us something else about the world, even if they are no longer maps. But what is interesting then is why and in what way are they not? What makes the map a map? And in what way is the map a project? I'm always going back to the same question. What makes a map, and the attempt to expose the project of the map when parts of it, in a way, are no longer there. To put it in context, this is not a whimsical and playful moment in the work of the artist, but is part of a much larger body of work which does the same with the structure of text and of narrative, which is subjected to similar manipulations and reconduced back to the relation with the body to the point of becoming personalized, because they're always participatory and personalized to a group or a person to become a something else, and then the maps are subject to that. So they're part of another a much wider project. Another term which I think is crucial to intervention in mapping is the process of thought it contains. And I want to read this because I confess this is what triggered my whole interest in rethinking the map and my project. Maybe the world is entirely constructed from thought. It's ever-changing, it's constantly renewing itself. A map, the ideal map, would be hard to define because of its lack of definition, and only in that instance it could begin to define itself more precisely. Nor would it be one designed to espouse any particular policy or persuasion. A map that would act as the prototype for all maps. A device, but still in fragment and open to everyone. This is a novel. I'm reading from a novel, but it's a novel deeply embedded in postmodern thought, written in the mid-90s. And it becomes relevant in considering the map as a project and the map as the impossible map, which is the prototype when we think of our impossible type in architecture. But let's look at the story for a moment, and this is the book. And the very cover is interesting because we have the fiction and the reality, and what's most interesting here is that the book in itself is a map in the sense that it has a faulty and partial and intentionally incorrect relation with reality. What was reality? Big question mark. Anyway. So we are in fiction, but we encounter a historical character. Fra Mauro is a monk who operates in the island of San Michele in Venice. You're smiling, so you probably know it very well. It is in history in the 1400s, in fiction is in the 1500s. Venice is at the moment the most important cartographic center and lab in the world. The monk is commissioned a mappa mundi. So far, history. The meditations are the fiction of what this postmodern, reinvented monk, cartographer monk, would have possibly thought in while trying to produce this map. First of all, the move of the narrative in time is crucial because it enables the fictional account to discuss the globe. post-discovery of the Americas. We're talking globe. But there is also the emphasis on the production of cartography as a form of speculation on an unknown which is constantly invented. So in the novel, Fra Mauro is visited by pilgrims, travelers, explorers, merchants. You can imagine the contents, and gets stories from his visitors. Not only descriptions of physical environment, but of course stories of people, beliefs, and they inform the making of his map. But the more he gets, and more insufficient and incomplete and confusing these events are. At the same time, we have here a novel which is a shredded map. It finds some anchorings in history and then leaves some gaps wide open while trying to construct narratives to reconnect some. So we have the impossible approximation, or intentional also approximation, impossibility of approximating reality and the whole narrative is structured as a map. There is at the same time a travel in time where things are anticipated or taken already for having developed or existing when they're not. And so gradually, in the story, Mauro discovers that the object of the map is not the map, and is not even the globe, but is the process of making the map and the very endlessness of the project. Needless to say, in the novel, the map will never come into being. And it's the very fact that it remains unattainable that keeps it never defined and never closed. And of course, this is the projection of a postmodern mind that reconsiders mapping. It's a post-Deleuzian reinvention of Mauro. But what I think is really interesting, and it's that little thing which I'm sure you know, is the reality, or what we know of the reality of the story, the real map, made by the real Fra Mauro. There's another interesting story that this is not the original but a copy, so which one was lost, etc., etc. So the map is produced. The map is produced in the 15th century, so there is no Americas or Australasia. There's Japan is an invention. It's a fictional construction, but even more important because it is there, because it is invented, as is the possibility to circumnavigate Africa. But what is really interesting here is the construction of the map and the information and speculation that it compacts, literally compacts, and that the space is ready to burst out of, not just out of its frame, but really out of its texture. Because it wants to look like a medieval mappamundi, but then what we see in the image is really not. It embraces the system of cartography developed by Ptolemy and then preserved by Arabic geography. It documents the land rather than illustrating symbols. I state here that the traditional monsters give way on the surface to passages of text which are very critical of these legends and belief. But even that is very ambiguous. Let me zoom in. The convention of Arab cartography is, of course, that the south is up and the north is down, so you can see the Mediterranean with a bit of head bending. The importance of the horror vacui, of the blue decoration of the waves, plays as a background to the bit of text, which, yes, it's true. And I don't have the details, but it's been catalogued, and you can read all the map if you want. It's on a CD. But what is interesting is that while the text dismiss some of the legends and myths, but there are here and there some monsters in the ocean sneaking out of the waves. But there's text from Marco Polo. I mean, how reliable? Reliable, yes, but how mythical in itself. So we have here the construction of another myth, but an incredibly important attempt to escape the conventions of medieval cartography. Just to sum up, let me stick to my text, because otherwise I'm going on forever. So the map belongs formally to the school of the medieval mappamundi in terms of structure, but what it does, it incorporates the new knowledge of contemporary geography. So the southern orientation, as we saw. There are images of religious history, but they are confined to the edges, to the exterior of the map. Jerusalem is no longer the center. The Atlantic and the Indian Ocean are no longer conceptual rings of water. The Mediterranean, of course, is drawn and very detailingly represented because, of course, of the much closer knowledge. But what remains is this horror vacui of the unknown. So what we can't fill with text or documentation, be it textual or graphic, we fill with the blue, which is beautiful in itself, but it remains, yes, the old fool which needs to claim a control or is terrified or not being able to control the figurative representation, but at the same suggests the possibility for other and more. As a note, and stop me the next time I digress, but actually if you go and see the map, and on Venice, and by extension, I would say most of the, what is it called, the Pianura Padana, it's erased by, oh, we are here, or in centuries of we are here. So yes, Jerusalem is not at the center, but then there is another center, which is not the religious center of the world, but maybe there's the we are here in Venice, and yes, this map is for the King of Portugal, but we are here, and this is where, so we have a cultural artifacts of Renaissance Venice, which is important because it contains and represents these cultural and intellectual tensions of cartography, and not only cartography of the world at this very threshold of cartographic, transoceanic explorations and expansions. And the critical and absolutely aware skill and value of keeping and holding together in a very, very difficult balance these two different traditions of what a mappamundi is. Ultimately representing knowledge and knowledge which includes refusing to see what is in front of your eyes, but also being able to project conjectures based on partial other knowledge. So although it looks like this perfectly framed jewel, what we have is something which is uneven, incomplete, with a series of conjectural elements which invites completion intervention and ultimately becomes a critical image which exposes a series of conflicts and problems of its time. Now I want to, so I'm claiming that this is incredibly beautiful, and it is definitely an image, but it is very critical. So now in order to support my argument, I'm going to show you non-images, or rather I'm not going to show you images, I'm going to show you maps which try to get away from being images. And of course the first one is another impossible map, which is the map Walter Benjamin claims he wanted to produce, but it's not the one he produced, because the one he produced is the Arcades Project, Passagenwerk, which is much more of a map of what he suggests in this fragment. Although in this fragment there are a series of important elements. Delimitation, reference points, location, recognitions allow us to enter a map and through it access a territory, even a new one, as far unknown, or even one only projected by imagination or speculation. So the temporal dimension is fundamental in the process of recognition. The map relates to the territory through repeated encounters, experiences that go beyond the instantaneous surprise of locative identification. And they are instead constructed by layers of memories. In this case, not accumulated memories of the different characters who go and inform the cartographer in Venice, but one's personal memories. There is also a very important process of organization of knowledge. You're probably familiar with this. I don't know, it was inflicted on me in my very first year. One of the very first reading was Berlin Childhood, not inflicted, I mean, it was very, very enjoyable. Berlin Childhood around the turn of the century. So what Benjamin does is, many years later, in 1932, he takes it and he reorganizes it in what he calls Berlin Chronicle. Berlin Chronicle is, I would argue, the map of Berlin childhood around the turn of the century. I'm not arguing, I'm borrowing. So the Chronicle is not simply a catalogue of images, of objects and places remembered, as the childhood blah 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 was, but it reactivates them in a process of remembering literally as recomposing. It makes map of these memories in the sense that it reconstructs the relationships of those memories to each other and to the remembering present of the narrator. So this map employs, like all maps, a set of devices, narratives and conventions for its constructions. And in order to do that, interestingly, Benjamin uses his own Ariadnes, the many figures, mythical figures of women in his life, who guide him through time and space in his experience of coming of age in Berlin. This, of course, is layered with the other map, which is the map of Paris. Again, not a drawn map, but the map of the book in fragments, which is the Passagenwerk, which becomes a sort of a model and parallel to this idea of the map as memory place, a sort of Proustian lost and remembered Berlin in this case instead of Paris. On this, Benjamin superimposes his personal map, the Berlin Memories, which contains and represents remembered objects and forms, but whose structure is constructed and organized, and here I'm quoting from him, by the mysterious work of remembrance, which is really the capacity for endless interpolations into what has been. It is only through this work of interpolation that Benjamin states his own, and I quote again, impotence before the city. And only through this process he can begin to overcome it and evoke a map, only evoke. His representation is interesting, it refers the possibility of the map, but it remains restricted to the writing of the city, and the map consists of restructuring his narration. But his map becomes the map of his memory and of his life, and more than the remembering of places in the city, it is really a process through which the author recognizes and reconstructs himself. And here I'm going towards the idea of authorship in the map. Who makes the map and how? And this is another famous non-map, which we don't need to read, but I just highlighted the key points. You know the story. The map of the ambitious empire, which wanted to have the best map of the empire, meaning the world, ends up being so good and so extensive and so detailed that coincides with the empire itself to the point where it becomes useless. That's the story and so far the story in Borges. Cartography is so fabulously excellent that it becomes redundant. That's something else to meditate on. What happens here? Scale and size do matter, as does the lack of abstraction. The territory becomes a reverse simulacrum, and here enters Jean Baudrillard, who obviously starts his work on simulations precisely from here, and starts elaborating on another possible twist to the story. And he says, if we were able to take as the finest allegory of simulation the Borges tale, blah, 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 maybe at this point where the map is so detailed that it ends up exactly covering the territory and the map becoming useless, then maybe we can think of this as introducing the second order simulacra. As the map becomes useless and it rots away on the territory, Baudrillard imagines that instead what is actually falling apart is the empire itself. And of course, an empire without map is an empire which is falling apart. But then the question is, what is reality, of course? And the process puts this into crisis. Let's remember Colomina's word of this idea of throwing a reality into crisis. So maybe what we live in and on is the map, which means the representation of something that is not there or is not there anymore, or at least is not what we think it may be. And this is then becomes, for Baudrillard, a whole argument to develop the idea of the precession of the simulacra. So the map of the story is obsolete and useless, not because it loses the characteristics that differentiated it from the territory and allowed it to filter and to provide information about the territory, abstraction, codification, distance, scale, but because it accumulates them. There's too many of them, and there's where there are no possibilities left. And if the map comes to coincide with the territory, then not only the map is useless, but the territory can be replicated and multiplied and is no longer an original. And then, just to show you the length of the argument, this becomes the starting point for a discussion of the precession of simulacra and the possibility to produce a reality, but is a reality, and I think this is the interesting point of the close of this beginning. It's a reality that it's nuclear and genetic. And this is, of course, coming into, I don't know if I can use the word algorithm, I think. But we're getting to this point where there is a different, beyond the representation and almost beyond the simulacrum and beyond the real, and the possibility of making another real, what he calls the hyperreal, but it can only be done in these nuclei and of what he calls miniaturized units, etc., which opens a gigantic question of how are they connected or reconnectable and organizable. To lighten things up, instead of without map, without territory, another familiar story, I presume. We're hunting for a non-existing creature, and therefore what we need is a map that represents the environment of this creature. And the environment is the sea, but is a completely sea. It's a complete sea. And yet this last verse, the map that they could all understand, is probably the crucial point here. So the artifice that allows us to recognize the map, identify, citing, experiencing the places that the map represents, is also the definition and location of its perimeter. So this is very important. It transforms the subject of cartographic representation into an object. While we experience reality in fragments of space and time, the map records and tries to produce a synthesis. We know it's arbitrary, authorship of the cartographer, and it's also recognizable. We need to engage with it and start this process of correspondence and recognition. So the delimitation of the map is undoubtedly important. It helps us to recognize known elements thanks to our memory. Forms, contours, roots, blah, 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 we've seen it earlier. So what happens when, yes, we have polar coordinates and perimeter, but what is this thing? The text, and I'm quoting from The Hunting of the Snark, tell us with infinite humor the impossible voyage of an improbable crew to find an inconceivable creature. So this is a map of infinite, improbable, and inconceivable. And yet, I would argue it's still a map. Suitably impossible, unlikely, inconceivable, the map of the ocean. So it's reduced to reference points, perimeter, and the cardinal points. It is empty. It's an absolute blank. But is it really empty? And in what way is this empty different from the all full of the blue waves in Fra Mauro's Mappamundi? Every possible geographical sign, convention, toponym, line, contour, coordinate that might even vaguely have suggested a measured descriptio of the world or the territory is pushed out. We have no reference solids, surface length, we have no coordinates. So we have this pure fluid element without a form. What we have is the vessel of its perimeter. This is the perfect map for this fantastic crew in Carroll's tale. The blank map, all full, all empty, you choose. No names, no figures, no coordinates. That might be used to define a direction and follow a route, may be useless in conventional locative processes, But here, for the impossible hunt of an inconceivable creature, it's the perfect tool. Perhaps the only possible entry point into the spatial narrative and dimension of the tale. That is, without any directional indication, this map offers the perfect locative "you are here" if you are looking for a creature that does not exist. It is the sea, the space of the smooth, that highlights the difficulties of the map. Or better, the need to reconceive it as a live and alive mutable tool, more akin to a diagram than to a drawing. To elaborate on the idea of the sea and question whether this is the best representation of the sea, or sorry, map of the sea. In the Enchafed Flood, I think it's the Rati Flutti in Italian, W.H. Auden examines the sea and the desert together as both sites of otherness to what is the organized and measured and measurable and representable space of the city. Not only formless, but before form, he calls it the primordial undifferentiated flux. The sea is the site of the undifferentiated and therefore of both the possible, what he says, by having form imposed upon. There's still the idea that the possible needs to have a form imposed on it, and the treacherous. Yet the uncontrollable and menacing unknown is also the very source of us, on our measure, as the sea is, and I quote again from Auden, is the state of barbaric vagueness and disorder out of which civilization has emerged. This is problematic. The sea is inside us. It is from this sea that civilization, as he calls it, has emerged. Now, what I'm trying to suggest here is that because of that the sea changes and remains immeasurable, not simply because it is liquid and dynamic, but because it is both a threat and a risk. He calls it always liable to relapse, and because it is us and inside us. And in this sense, it is intrinsic to life. Auden observes, I quote again, that the author of the book of Revelation notices in his vision of the new heaven and earth at the end of time is that, and he quotes, there was no more sea. And he comments that this is because the sea, and Auden says, is so little of a friendly symbol. But I would argue that the sea is connected to life, and outside life, no sea. For Auden, the sea is also the unbounded, characterized like the desert, I quote again, by the absence of limitation, and that is why the ocean chart that the Bellman bought describes them well. And this is again another fragment which comes to a very similar conclusion. Dismissing cartography, they are merely conventional signs, and then we come to this perfect and absolute blank. So this non-map, maybe, and apparently the opposite of Borges's map of the empire, is in fact a faithful representation of the sea, of its formless and dynamic nature. But the true map of the sea that dispenses with grids, coordinates, lines, creation, centers, and reference points. As such, it is the perfect map of the smooth as it can only be, an anti-figure, but not an anti-map. And to almost mirror what I was arguing with the examples before, it maybe doesn't look like a map, but it is a map. Very briefly through this, because I'm talking about Mario Carpo's work. I don't know if he discussed this when, or briefly covered this, the absence of form. Another map, which is not a map, or is an invisible map. And it's Alberti's Descriptio Urbis Rome. Carpo of this says, is not a map, but, I quote, a list of polar coordinates which allows the reader to draw a representation of Rome at any scale desired based on the coordinates for 175 key points. Carpo calls Alberti, in his attitude towards the representation of the map, iconophobic writing, which I think synthesizes perfectly. We know that Alberti preferred, in discussing architecture in his treatise, to use words and numbers rather than images. But particularly in this case, where he considers the map and the topographical representation of the city as an utilitarian form of representation, something to be precise but also usable, it is here that Alberti really dismisses the use of the image. He doesn't trust the manual repetition of images. The precision of the word and the number are still much greater than that of a figurative copy. So what he offers, without going into details, is not the drawing of the map, but the drawing plus the instruction of the instrument through then one following his instructions. Of course, here the issue is who is the author of the map? Answer, Alberti, of course. You can only make mistakes. What we get really is the circle of the horizon, and more in detail here, and the revolving spoke, and the series of coordinates and instructions to make the map again and again and again, but always afresh and anew. You have the instruction, you have the instruments, you apply them, you use them, you enact it, you produce the map. Now, what is this map, which doesn't exist, if not in the prototype, Alberti, or rather the pre-prototype, which Alberti produced in order to then produce this, because we could argue this is the real map. But what comes after, and this is one of the many workshops done by, I presume, architecture rather than geography students, in some American university and enactment, and they show you how it's very clear, so it can be done. The question is, the map can be drawn following instruction, but it cannot be reproduced. And this, at the moment of another mechanical reproduction, not the photographic one, pre-Benjamin, at that moment in time becomes a very important debate, and Carpo explores it. But let's stay for a moment with this. So this map can be drawn following instructions, but it cannot be reproduced. Actually, the map that would reproduce the constructed map would only be an image of the map and not the map itself. Alberti's concern is for the accuracy and the reproducibility of information. Especially in the construction of the map, and the diffidence in the replication of images we know of also from his work in architecture, more explicitly in architecture. So what we have here is the possibility of the map as image that does not exist other than in its original production or subsequent productions rather than reproductions. Now, why am I showing you Lewis Carroll together with Alberti, which is, I'm a bit, this is a bit, okay. What is this odd couple doing here? We have the absurd map of a nonsensical tale and what claims to be a rational digital tool to avoid errors of manual reproduction in images. What do? They're maps without figure, we could say, but they do an important thing. They separate communication and representation in map making. And therefore, because we can't immediately look at them, they make us understand what they do, or rather what the map does. They expose the impossibility to map life as well. Alberti's map is not a map of Rome. It's only the beginning of a map of Rome. One cannot measure, I'm referring to the Carroll one cannot measure, and for this reason it works with and as the sea, but it does not represent the sea. But for that reason it's successful, we could say. The other can only measure, but it remains relational, allowing to construct shapes that vary with the manual positions and the relations, but it has to give up a lot of other information. But what they both do is to denounce the insufficiency and the unreliability of images and similitudes in mapping, that is, in figurative mapping. Last example, and we can eat if we still have the stomach. Time. Again, a fragment from the same long paragraph, really, from Deleuze and Guattari, which I am misappropriating and ransacking. But we go back to something we saw, probably Ingram also borrowing from them indirectly. The map constructs the unconscious, but also, importantly, it fosters connections. And another example from art, and another very famous one. It's 6th of August, 1965. It's the 20th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, and Kikuji Kawada publishes the map. The map is not a map. The map is a fold-out photographic book in a box, but it's a bit more complex than that. So I'm just going to go through how this map literally unfolds. We have what? Oh, you can't see it. There's too much light. That's the only thing which actually is a map and looks like a map on the cover. We have a book, a box, a book, and the booklet which accompanies it, which has a very brief description. But really, the photographic book and the choreographed sequences are self-explanatory. It's like Hercules without the name. The book is a map of time and memories, traces, events on the territory, but the artist himself argues it's a map of a future as well. How it works, this is the map unfolded, part of it unfolded. How do we come to this? Every other page is a double fold out. Viewing becomes a physical interaction with it. In a way, it reproduces the moment of looking and pointing at a map. But here we have to unfold the double page. But they're structured with a double fold out, which means that you reveal things, but then you have to make things disappear and concentrate your attention to expose others. You look at a page, you unfold the second one, then you must return to the first page to close it and be able to look at the third one, and so on. You really need to be in a gallery setting to be able to have the overview. Like the map, the book offers a synoptic view, but as in when we use a map, we must locate ourselves and move across it. And so viewing becomes a dynamic experience. There's no narrative, there's no given scale, but the interaction of images with the images gives it to us, because we go from urban spaces to human faces to micro details, and I'll show you some. And so we have this constant zooming in and out, which we almost do with the body. The map combines a series of series of photographs. I'm quoting from the artist's description. A ruined castle that was blown up intentionally by the Japanese army during World War II, photographs taken a decade after the atomic bomb exploded in Hiroshima, images of advertising, scrap iron, the trampled national flag, and emblems of the American forces such as Lucky Strike and Coca-Cola, all twisted together. There are also photos of shrines made to the memory of young kamikaze pilots and mementos, uniforms, photo portraits of young faces. The Hiroshima photographs show the details of the damages to the surface of what is now called the atomic bomb dome, the only structure left standing. And then what looks like the map is actually not a map, and it's a series of stark black and white close-ups of the stains and damages on the concrete and the flaking of the walls and the flaking ceiling. A sort of survey in time of memory. And these are the images which are placed at the center of the book. One need again to unfold and open the double fold-outs and close the fold-outs to come and to zoom in and onto these and then move away. And yet they don't reveal secrets, these images. They don't allow any privileged access to any truth. Like a map, I would say, they remain quite opaque. But what they do, they act as mirror of our conscience. They allow insights into ourselves more than anything else. They look like maps, but the true map is in the series and in the folding in and out and away in the box. So like a map, we can access it at any point of horror or distorted remains or frozen or poisoned lives. And this is really the intention of the artist who, I don't have the quote, I'll read it, who says the illusions of various maps emerge. And what emerges from the map is suggests that by drawing a future stratum and sealing the history, the nationality, the fear and anxiety of destruction and prosperity. So here we have a map that collapses in images, past and future, and I quote again from the words of the artist, twisting across the bridges of the centuries through conflicting space and time. So to end, maybe the map is not a schema. If the schema remains defined as, and I quote again from the call of this seminar, the conventional model simplified compared to the mode complex of reality, etc., 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 a mechanism or a process that we are used to employ as a means of understanding of the surrounding world. Maybe the map is more. Maybe the map is the possibility of the impossibility of the schema, and then schema needs to be redefined again. Thank you.
I improvise myself as respondent. We're pretty late.
Terribly late.
So, if there are questions, I think that you agree if the questions might be in Italian.
Yeah, of course. Sì, sì, sì. Basta. Già siamo stanchi.
But it is even an occasion for international students even to participate in the discussion because they do not really participate in previous meetings. But I say that we have students that work on maps, like Federico, for instance, and I think it will be very helpful helpful. The lecture you gave, it was very brilliant, very extremely interesting, and really thought of, let's say, subjects and issues we can even develop in further meetings. So I really open the debate, our questions, whatever.
I'm scared because
Sì.
mi rendo conto che la mappa ci sia degli aspetti che rendono.
Scusa, mi alzo così ti vedo.
Grazie, io
Beh, ci alziamo tutti e due.
mi rendo conto che talvolta la mappa abbia dei connotati che la rendono a tutti gli effetti un costrutto sociale. La sola cosa però è che guardando questo esempio ho paura che il costrutto sia, diciamo, venga applicato due volte e che si rischi di portare quel discorso su un ambito artistico e non tanto progettuale, cioè nel senso, ok, questa è una mappa, come la uso per fare un progetto? Cioè si perde quel genere stanze di essenzialità che dovrebbe distinguere forse la pratica progettuale dalla pratica artistica.
Non la usi la mappa? Allora, se questa domanda mi fa molto piacere perché era proprio quello che volevo dire. La mappa non la usi. Certo che ci sono le mappe che usiamo, ma la mappa la fai. A me questo serve il problema dell'italiano è che poi io pasticcio con l'italiano, ma per evidenziare o produrre o provocare una consapevolezza che la mappa la fai. Nel momento in cui la usi, la fai. La mappa che tu vuoi usare, scusa, io ti do del tu, diamoci del tu. Nel momento in cui tu la usi, la trasformi. Ma chi l'ha fatta prima di te, l'ha fatta. L'ha fatta non uno da solo, ma tanti, e anche se l'ha fatta uno da solo è un accumulo di convenzioni e di informazioni. A me questa cosa interessa e apposta guardo alle mappe di artisti. Questo è un pezzo di un lavoro più ampio in cui ho guardato alle mappe che, non so cosa, sì, gli anni 90 credo, direi, grosso modo, è cominciato ad andare di moda, no? C'era James Corner che ha fatto tutto taking measurements, ha fatto queste bellissime mappe dei suoi progetti e del territorio americano. Ora, quelle sono delle mappe critiche che vengono direttamente applicate in architettura. Se tu le guardi potresti dire sono delle mappe, sono dei disegni, sono delle cose composite, cioè incominciano a scivolare un po' via dalla convenzione sia della mappa che del disegno. E questo era il discorso di interesse non solo dell'architettura, ma anche più a largo territorio, paesaggio, no? Come si rappresenta questa cosa che facciamo quando questa cosa non è più considerata come un oggetto, come una scatola chiusa e definita. No? Abbiamo bisogno di uno strumento molto più aperto e rielaborabile. Allora in quel momento è venuto fuori questo grande interesse per la cartografia, diversi architetti hanno incominciato a disegnare e anche quando facevano cose piccole come scala, come se facessero una mappa invece che una pianta, che è anche una cosa interessante concettualmente, e alcuni continuano. Il problema è da un lato provocare questo scollamento fra la mappa come strumento, che poi tu, non so, immagino se tu sia un architetto, la usi in un certo modo, se tu sei un navigatore o un turista, la usi, però comunque sia, c'è questa idea, pure Alberti che dice una cosa utilitaria, quindi deve essere fatta precisa perché tutti poi devono poterla usare in un certo modo, riprodurla, eccetera. Ma nel momento in cui la usi, intanto i diversi usi la modificano. Per quello, no, Sophie Kahl che si perde per Venezia, Benjamin che cerca di ricordarsi i posti che magari non esistono più, dove è cresciuto, Ma il lavoro che fanno gli artisti, siccome rimuovono una serie di elementi, alcuni lo fanno, per quello ho mostrato vari esempi, in un certo senso in un momento questa cosa che ha questo nome, mappa, è il risultato di un lavoro, di una serie enorme di scelte, no? Quindi sì, continuiamo ad usarla perché ci serve la cartografia per poi andare a fare un progetto, che non vuol dire imbrogliamo dov'è la linea di confine, ma teniamo presente, questo naturalmente funziona più a livello di progetti territoriali, che queste sono di per sé stesse delle costruzioni con una serie di... E io ho cercato di mostrare alcuni, ma pochissimi, cioè è bella l'idea della mappa, perché la mappa è infinita, no? Quindi questa cosa potrebbe crescere per così, ma anche per così, no? O per colà. Il mio è un tentativo semplicemente di, da un lato, appropriare l'idea della mappa come denuncia dell'insufficienza del disegno, delle convenzioni della proiezione ortogonale, combinata poi con anche assonometria e prospettiva, eccetera, come insufficienti a rendere la rappresentazione e produzione di spazio che il progetto fa. Allora la mappa, ma infatti in quel periodo come discorsi la mappa, ma anche le fotografie, ma non fotografie, le serie fotografiche, adesso c'è moltissima gente che lavora con frammenti di video o di cinema, quindi la cosa ambigua, per non parlare dell'idea del rendering in architettura e di tutti i riferimenti culturali, da un lato c'è la neve... l'essere mai neutrale della costruzione di un'immagine, che vabbè è ovvio, insomma è un costrutto culturale, e nel momento in cui la si usa per qualcos'altro, che può essere il progetto architettonico, tenere presente che nel momento in cui la usiamo produciamo una critica della mappa in questo caso che usiamo, ma siamo anche influenzati, anche se minimamente non importa, dall'oggetto su cui lavoriamo. L'ho messa male, ma non so se tu insegni anche, ma gli studenti del primo anno, almeno nel mio mondo, mi arrivano con stampate di Google Map, a parte che sono brutte, un'altra storia. Ma che cosa vuol dire? Cioè, non sanno che stanno usando una cosa, a parte che la bellezza è che è una cosa che cambia ogni giorno, no? Vabbè, già l'atto di stamparla è interessante, vabbè. Ma non sanno che cosa sono queste linee. Allora, se facciamo gli architetti e non siamo consapevoli di che cosa significa una linea e non discutiamo che cos'è una linea, siamo messi male. Che poi questa linea sia fatta con uno stecco per terra o costruita digitalmente, pensiamo ancora così. Poi è un altro discorso, no? Perché poi si aprono... io credo che il tema affascinante di questo seminario sia che ci sono un sacco di cose che vorremmo dire, ma ci rendiamo conto che sarebbe un'altra lezione o un altro seminario, quindi insomma complimenti a voi. Insomma, ti invito ogni volta che fai un progetto e usi una mappa o una cartografia che hai preso al comune, no? di pensare, perché prima di tutto l'hai scelta, e poi di pensare a che cos'è questa cosa che hai in mano, in questo senso. E poi per la nostra disciplina come rappresentiamo il nostro pensiero, perché è pensiero sullo spazio, le nostre decisioni, per non parlare poi di quello che decidiamo di non rappresentare, cioè le scelte, i processi di omissione, per non parlare di quelli di occultamento, sono un'altra cosa interessante. Quindi la mappa, sì, strumento, ma
cioè, scusa, non so se ho risposto.
Credo di sì, cioè,
queste misure quindi c'è sempre un po' uno scatto tra quello, cioè questa è stata prodotta per progettare ma con la possibilità.
No, ma questa è la bandiera giapponese. Ecco, che cos'è questa cosa? È la bandiera giapponese? O è un cimelio che ci ricorda che non bisognerà mai più avere esplosioni atomiche? O è parte di un progetto che si intitola La Mappa? Perché se io venivo qui e ti mostravo James Corner, oppure FOA, oppure quello che sta facendo Landscape Urbanism all'EA, oppure, non so, le cose pubblicate su New Geographies, sono mappe che sembrano mappe, they look like maps, they are maps, they look like maps. Per instillare, come si dice, un po' di dubbio, ti devo mostrare delle mappe o delle cose che io dico sono delle mappe e tu pensi no, ma queste non sono delle mappe. E se io ti mostro delle mappe, ti dico sono delle mappe e poi andiamo via, dici vabbè, siamo tutti d'accordo. Invece dobbiamo non essere d'accordo. Infatti le mappe sono dei fantastici strumenti per discussione, polemica, guerra, ridefinizione di cose immaginarie che poi alla fine devono diventare confini, insomma, vai a dirlo in Israele o a Donald Trump, non sono neutre le mappe. Ecco, questo è il mio approccio. Se vuoi, la prossima volta facciamo tutta una serie su come gli architetti usano le mappe in maniera critica. Però è importante essere più estremi, se no certo che poi queste cose.
I would like to underline just a little thing. When we saw Benjamin in the Berlin Chronicles, very important, I think, is my book. I choose a system of science on a gray background. So he did not create a map, but he tried to create a system of science, a convention. Because there are multiple levels of convention in map. When we saw the lost maps, there was an inner level of convention which was all names are lost. Not all names are another thing. Because if all names were something different, we could think that, oh, it's a map of a place we don't know, I don't know where it is, but it's a real place. When we saw all names are lost, we understand there is an unreal place, so we understand something more. So there is a level of convention which is, so there are multiple levels of convention, in my opinion. When we create a map, we are creating the convention of what we want to say, or what we don't even know we are saying. And then there is the level of communication, which relies on other levels of conventions. So, for example, the wellness map, empty map, which has the north, east, west, and south indication, that level of convention makes the blank paper a map. So there is a level of convention which is very low, and probably when we take a map from Torino or Politecnico or something similar, there is a very low level of convention, so we are neutral, or no, neutral obviously not, but less, they communicate less, let's say, or they communicate a very low level of information, but we continuously add the level of convention when we design different subjects on different level of foundation which recreates even again. So the project is something similar to the map of the system of foundation it creates all during the process of design.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah. So it's not just the use of the map, but the project. Yeah, we could think of the project, especially when it's collaborative, as a making of a joint making of a map.
Yeah, it's similar. I don't know. I mean, the map is, if I understood, I'm asking.
No, we're just asking each other.
Instead of thinking how we use map, we make the map is more an hybrid stance between the two, because indeed we create a conventional level, and the map is something which is the result, and in the same way it creates a level of convention between me, the creator of the map, for example, other the users, other which recreates the map and so on. Can we talk about this multiple level of convention system, in your opinion, sort of conventions in the maps?
Yeah, I don't think we need to define them as low level or high level. You could say, I mean, you could think of chronologies, but then they change in time. Very simple example is the north-south rotation, or geographically or culturally. But the important thing of the element, the convention means communication and agreement, because if you make a map, which nobody can read because you don't provide the tools to access it, so that is why I think it's very important, and that's where it has something else in common with architecture, not architectural drawing, but really the making of the architectural project, which is a layering of different levels of information for different audiences in a way. Benjamin doesn't want to make the map. Benjamin wants to write, and he wants to make a map of himself, so he can't draw a map of himself. And he can't draw a map of Paris. Ultimately, he would have made a movie. He wanted to make a movie. Certainly not a drawing, certainly not a map. And there's this issue of the constant change. What is interesting in Benjamin is that it becomes self-referential. So the me when I was a child, the me when I account of my childhood the first time, the me when I rework the account of my childhood, are all different, and we need to find ways to talk about the same things. Multiply this by many people. I think that is the interesting. Yeah.
Sorry, we're very late. Just one very quick question that I think you can.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the consequences of what you presented, this idea that the map is also a project. I was thinking if you agree that in this sense, then what you presented, when you presented like these procedures of art and how art was, those procedures of art was recreating the idea of the map. They were not simply like creating new maps. They were reinventing the procedure of creating maps. If you would agree then that what that means is that the map always precedes the territory. And what that means is that the ideas that you build, the way you think, actually recreate reality itself. Recreate the reality that's being represented like that. Recreate, it's not just a representation of the territory, but it's actually the foundation of this territory.
I don't know if it's the foundation, but it affects it.
Okay.
Allora, visto che è tardissimo, io ho delle due cose dottorali, però prima di tutto ringrazio Franco Framinente e Stoppani. La mappa si fa come lo schema, che lo siamo architetti, quindi possano partecipare al processo di costruzione del territorio, che non è ancora territorio per quanto noi lo sappiamo, o se no non riusciamo a operare o progettare superficie. Questo è supporto. La carta lì della faccia dello snack è una carta vuota, è un grande dispositivo per produrre figure, no? Idee che si può giocare. Quindi questo è molto importante. I dottorandi dell'ASP e degli altri dottorati, noi oggi pomeriggio faremo una riunione per decidere come andare avanti, come finalizzare questo corso. Sicuramente ci sarà un seminario finale in autunno, intorno alle vacanze, e daremo, come abbiamo già anticipato, a grandi linee quale può essere il contributo dei dottorandi, daremo delle giorni specifiche se riusciamo. Se volete venire a riunione anche voi alle 3, che siamo qua in sala Teste Pasti. E chiudo solo dicendo che i nostri ospiti in generale ci hanno dimostrato che la nostra sfida è ancora tutta aperta, quella di mettere assieme le discipline, non solo 2, forse 3, come diceva Laurent, l'interdisciplinarietà si fa non affiancando discipline su un oggetto che tutti pensano che sia, che consista in una maniera naturale, ma si costruisce un nuovo oggetto scientifico. Non so se ci riusciremo, da questo punto di vista non lo so. Ai nostri ospiti invece dico che ringrazio tutti, non solo voi, ma anche gli altri, che ci hanno dimostrato che quando delle vertice, la filosofia o il pensiero e la costruzione di nuovi concetti, queste mura qualcosa